Today's daf is daf Zayin, and we're all caught up, and we start at the top of Zayin Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. Okay, so we had an interesting Mishnah which was about when a woman remains forbidden to eat truma, but it was really a sort of a Mishnah about when you would not go through with the procedure, when there were Eidim in Medina Hayam, when she admitted, and so on. And as we'll see, that's going to be somewhat of a necessary background, because now we're going to deal with the next steps in the procedure, and now we already know the things that could prevent the procedure from going forward. So let's take a look here at the next Mishnah. And now we actually begin a nice description of how the procedure would look like. Okay, so this is more descriptive than is going to be halachic. Sort of making halachic rulings. Obviously, the implicit sort of halacha is here, but it's going to much more be a descriptive. This Mishnah, a big Mishnah at the bottom of the daf. Let's take a look. Ketzad Osala. What would you do with her once it's this stupid thing? It's about to. Hold on a second. I apologize. This thing wants to reboot itself on me.
People might think you're talking about the woman. It's like one long sentence.
All right. I don't know what to do. This is going to reboot itself on me. You know what? I'm just going to let it reboot, and then I'll restart the video. Okay. So, all right. So, what would you, Ketzad Osala, what would you do to her when you have to now, she was warned and she went into seclusion, and now she has the status of a Sotah, and now we have to go through with the process. So, Lebeitin Shaboto Makom. You bring her to the Beitin in that locale. Now, again, notice, and this is the point that I've been making from the beginning, that we have taken something which in the Torah is the husband's sort of jealousy, and we have now made it a judicial matter. We have witnesses and evidence, circumstantial evidence, things that make us sort of feel that the Beit Din, have to determine what her status is. It's no longer about the husband. So the first place to bring it, in the Torah, of course, she's brought to the Beis HaMikdash, directly for the ritual. But here, the first place she's brought is the Beit Din. And by doing that, by making that to be, what do you do in this case? You bring her to a Beit Din, right? So it makes it that clear statement that this is about din, right? So that's the place where she's brought, to a Beit Din. So you bring her to the local Beit Din. And what does that Beit Din do? Now that Beit Din takes over in terms of, supervising the whole procedure. And here's what they do. Yes?
You've been, as I understand, you've been trying to say that we're taking, what the Gemara is trying to do is take it out of the realm of the husband,
discretion and
basically, but isn't it also possible that what they're trying to do is taking out of the discretion of the control of the Kohen?
Yes. So thank you for pointing that out. Both of those are correct. Meaning you're taking something, and that happens a lot. Which is that Chazal basically. We can even just start with the fact that the whole authority of Chazal and Beit Din is based on the pasuk of Al Pi HaTorah Asher Yorucha, right? Which in the Torah is El HaKohanim, El HaShofet Asher Yeh Bayamim Haim. But the Kohanim are much more dominant, they're in the plural than the Shofet Bayamim Haim. But Chazal very often sort of assert their authority, right? Especially if you realize, right, at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, clearly the authority much more resided amongst the Kohanim than amongst the rabbis. But Chazal constantly in describing, those realities, asserting their authority. So, for example, they speak about a Beis Din would determine, whether a Kohen was fit for avoda or not, when a question had come up about his yichus and so on. So you are absolutely correct that there's also that element. So it's taking something which is about the husband's passion, unfounded, discretion, and about the Beis Din, and about the Kohanim, and it's doing two things. It's right. And by putting it into the Beit Din, it's making it objective, based on circumstance, based on testimony and evidence, and taking it away from the Kohanim, and ultimately putting it under the authority of the Beit Din. So both of those are correct. Now, by the way, going back to Dove's point, Moshe Lo Shnei Talmidei Chachamim might have an echo for some people about what happens at the era of Yom Kippur when they have the Kohen Gadol is getting ready to learn to prepare for the Avodas Hayom, and that's a perfect example where if you read the description in Yoma, the Beit Din is overseeing that whole process, and the Beit Din is Moshe Lo Shnei Talmidei Chachamim, and they're the ones that teach him Torah the whole night and keep him up the whole night, and they also make an oath that he's not going to change the Seder Avodah. So that's like a perfect example about Beit Din being the ones to be Chazal, supervise what's going on in the Beit HaMikdash, but actually exactly that phrase of Moshe Lo Shnei Talmidei Chachamim. So interestingly, you have the same thing here. So what do? They hand over 2 Torah sages to the husband, Shema Yavo Aleha Baderech, and they are going to be their escorts and the chaperones, the minders, to accompany them and bring them to Yerushalayim. Now, by the way, for those who are wondering, the next stop in Yerushalayim is not Yerushalayim Beit HaMikdash, and guess where the next stop is? Yerushalayim to the... What else is there? Beit Din HaGadol. That's in the Beit HaMikdash, but that's the next stop. Okay, so from one Beit Din, sending them off to the Supreme Court. Okay, so it's one Beit Din to another Beit Din. But the very fact also that there are these 2 agents of the Beit Din that are accompanying them is sort of based in sort of being part of the whole. At no stage is this now the husband is schlepping his wife, right? The husband is dragging his wife. No. We, the Beit Din, are sending this case to be processed, and our agents are going along with, and we're the ones essentially bringing her. And we'll see a little bit about that tension in the Gemara. And to the point that it says Shema Yavo Aleha Baderech. We're afraid that why are they accompanying? Because maybe he'll have sex with her along the way. And why would that be a problem? Well, because she's a Sotah, and she's husband and wife are forbidden to have sex once she has the status of a Sotah until it's clarified. And we don't so stam, we care about everybody's averas, but then the waters won't work. It'll undermine the whole process, right? Because we learn out that it's only when the man is clean from sin will the waters be effective. So in order to ensure that this is going to work and be effective, we have to now supervise. But it makes the man again, notice what it does. It really makes the man now an object of suspicion, and he can't now ruin everything. And again, so we really, the Beit Din, are not taking control and making sure it's going to happen, as opposed to being about the man and his wife, the man's initiative and what he wants to do to his wife. You had a question. Sanhedrin, yeah, that's right, exactly. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ba'ala Ne'eman Aleh. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, yes. Yes, went to Yerushalayim to the Beit HaMikdash, and in the Beit HaMikdash was the Beit Din HaGadol, was the Sanhedrin. They had what?
They had to go there anyway to do the law.
Well, they're going to be going there anyway, but the way Chazal sort of, because of the making it about Beit Din, then everything is going to first local Beit Din, from there to Beit Din HaGadol, and there the Beit Din HaGadol is essentially going to hand it over to the Kohanim for the ritual. Now we'll see how central and necessary the Beit Din HaGadol is. So we'll get to that, yes.
So in addition to the Chachamim managing and controlling, let's say, the authority of the passions of the husband, right?
Right.
He's jealous now, he's going to have he's going to have relations with her.
Right.
Would you also say that it's the Chachamim's way of dealing more rationally with magic? The same way of like Nechoshet, like the Nechoshet?
Well, possibly, but they don't get away from the fact that there is going to be a ritual that's going to prove it. But what you're saying is that by forefronting the Beit Din's role, it backgrounds the ritual, and as we're going to see, they're constantly trying to do things so they don't have to get to the ritual. Right. So that's a good point too. It does put in the background the whole focus on this sort of magical procedure.
In theory, the ritual works. But they're going to be okay.
Right, exactly, and that's the other thing that happens. There's so many reasons that the ritual doesn't work that we heard yesterday that Rabbi Shimon was afraid that would undermine the efficacy of the ritual. The reality is it does undermine the efficacy of the ritual, right? And it's a way of possibly explaining why the ritual sometimes wouldn't work if there's all these other reasons. But it's also a way, I think, what Dov the second said is also a good point that it shifts our focus from the ritual. All of this thing about centralizing Beis Din, right, has all of those types of effects. Did you have a question? No? Okay. All right. So let's now see the Gemara. It's really fun, this stuff. Okay. So the Gemara says like this: Trey the Ihu. So we're going to try to figure out why you needed two representatives of the court. Okay. Trey the Ihu Hatlosa. So two of the representatives of the chaperones and the husband. That makes three men there. Let's say this supports Rav. When do we say that there is a halacha? This is now going about based on a teaching in Kiddushin that a Mishnah in Kiddushin that speaks about an Isser Yichud, an Isser of a woman being in seclusion with a man. This is not about the case of the husband warning. This is just the general Isser of Yichud, a concern of a man and a woman shouldn't be in seclusion together if they're not husband and wife because it might lead to illicit sex. You get married, not married, whatever. So anyway, so the question there is that it wouldn't be seclusion if there were two men. But here there's three men. So let's say, why do we need three? Why didn't you just send one Talmid Chacham? So the Gemara says maybe this supports what Rav says. Damar Rav Yudam Rav Lo Shanu El Be'ir. That when do we say that two men and a woman is not considered seclusion? Again, for general laws of Yichud, if it's in a city. Avol B'derech, if you're going on the way on a journey, Adika Shlosha, you need three. Why do you need three? One person's going to have to go to the bathroom. Okay, and again, presumably in the city, that would be a circumstance that would not have to take him away too far. But here, maybe they could have the other two people wait a few feet away from the bathroom or something.
Other people around them.
But here,
left in the city.
Well, no, because we're saying that these are the only people around. That's how we're measuring whether it constitutes yichud or not. But if you're in the city, you go to some outhouse or wherever you go. I don't know exactly what setups they had, but anyway. But the other two people are the remaining man and the woman are a few feet away. But if you're out in the middle of nature, right, you want to go into the forest a little bit of privacy. So you're going to get a little bit further away, and that's going to leave the two behind in a case in a scenario of yichud. Maybe that's true also. Like similar to what Rabbi Dov said, you could make arrangements that somebody take your place. Maybe that's true too. You make arrangements somebody take your place. Okay. Shema Yitzar Echmem L'Kavav. One person has to go to the bathroom. And then the other man is left together with this woman who is forbidden, not his wife. So you see that would explain why we need two Talmidei Chachamim, because they're going on a journey and they need to be three men.
Nothing to do with Aaron necessarily, just any man and any woman, which is not Aaron.
Right. So the question is, what about Pani and Pnuya if she's not an Ida? Let's not worry about that. We'll do it when we do Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, "Lo, no, maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, but we can otherwise explain why you need two. You need two that they should be witnesses. Now, what do they need to be witnesses for? What are they testifying to? So Rashi points out that they would testify to the fact that if he went ahead and did have sex with his wife, that they're now going to come and say, we cannot go through with the proceedings. The man had sex with his wife. Okay, and you would presumably need a normal evidence, normal standard of testimony to prove that. Eid Echad is believed to say she had sex. It wouldn't be believed to say she had sex with the man she was suspected of, not that the husband and wife had sex on the journey. So the whole point is to make sure this doesn't happen and then to treat it appropriately if it does happen. So you need the two to serve as witnesses. So the Gemara says, now the Gemara has another question. Talmidei Chachamim in...
that this man is going to be sleeping with this woman in the middle of the road while the other one's going to the...
Yeah, or at an inn. No. We're no longer in the Yichud case. Whatever. They sleep over the night, they find an inn, and he sneaks off into her room, and they're having sex. Okay? So that we want to make sure that if that happens, we're going to know, A, we want to make sure it doesn't happen, and B, if it does happen, we're going to know about it and not go through with the procedure. So the Gemara now says...
So he's not going to sneak off if there are two people in his room with him, two other men will sneak
No. We are no longer doing the two for Yichud. We need the two so that they will be able to testify and we will be able to stop the procedure. Okay? There's two different concerns, right? One is, not two different, but one is that will it be... will this generally prevent them from having sex because there's chaperones? And then the question is, in order for that, is one sufficient or do we need two if they're going on a journey? We don't know the answer to that. You could argue either way. But even if one would have been sufficient to, as a general rule, prevent sex and not considered yichud, people that are committed to making something happen will make it happen, and you want to make sure that there are witnesses to testify if in the end it did happen. All right?
When it would not be believed to say the husband had sex with his
Correct. Okay? All right, so now the Gemara says like this: Talmidei Chachamim in Kol Yama Lo. So only Torah sages, not others. Now what's that about? Like if you just need witnesses, just send 2 people. Now the obvious point I think is that this is to emphasize based in supervision, based in presence. These are they're not just stam people learning in a yeshiva. Presumably they're learners of Torah associated with the Beit Din, so they're part of the, and therefore that it's emphasized. Maybe, okay, that's true. But anyway, that's what I would say, that it emphasizes based in supervision. Let's see what the Gemara says. Maybe this is what's the other statement of Rav. That when is it that it's not considered yichud when they are people of upstanding character? But if it's people that are known to be loose with in sexual matters, it's interesting who do you put in which category, then even 10 men with a woman won't be trusted not to have sex. There's a case actually that they snuck a woman out of a city on a bed, and there were 10 men, and it was in order to have sex. I don't know if it means that all 10 were engaged in the sexual act. I hope not. Maybe it does. But anyway, it certainly means that if people are not are considered paroots, licentious or in sexual matters, then it doesn't matter if there are other men around. So the men, specifically the men. The idea being that we're not afraid that this one man and woman will have sex in the presence of another man. That's why it's not yichud. So it's saying, but if the other man is somebody that has no sexual boundaries, which is sort of the idea of parutz, then that won't be a restraint. Then the man and woman could have sex even in the presence of 10 other men. They won't mind if these men are prutzim. So maybe that's why we need Talmidei Chachamim. Now, not to suggest that anybody who's not a Talmid Chacham is a parutz, but this hopefully ensures that we're not dealing with prutzim, and maybe that's what the issue is about. So the man says, "Lo." No, now they'll know to give him hatra'ah. So hatra'ah, now we're back to classic din, like witnesses and warning. So why do we need to give him hatra'ah? So Rashi says, if a man violates the prohibition, or woman, of having sex while she's a sotah, we're going to learn out that that's a biblical prohibition, and he would be deserving of lashes. So now we want to send these Talmidei Chachamim, because they'll know the halacha, and they'll be able, that if he's about to do it, to give him hatra'ah. Now this is very bizarre, right? All of a sudden we worry that we want to ensure that somebody's going to get lashes if they deserve it. It's one thing in the context we want to make sure that the sotah process continues properly, and they don't do an act that's going to interfere with it, and that if they do, we'll be able to know about it and interrupt it. But why is it important for us to make sure that he gets the malchus that he deserves? And again, I think ultimately it's probably not so important, but what it does is again, sort of really says this is about din. What's din about? Witnesses who can give warning, who can make sure you're going to get lashes if you do it. It really forefronts the whole din part of the proceedings. If we have witnesses, Talmidei Chachamim, which I think are specifically as sort of a mini type of a beis din, representatives of the court who can give warning, and that again really makes it all about an ongoing process of din.
An issur that is mutal alav now on the husband.
Yes, but still, I'm not sure we would always want to, proactively make sure that people are going to get hatra'ah so they can get punished for the yisurim that they do. So again, I just think that bringing hatra'ah to the forefront is a way of bringing the idea of din to the forefront. Yes.
It's not about making sure we have it clear that he violated lo tasa and then we can't go through the proceeding. Even if he didn't have warning, we still wouldn't go through if we had 2 witnesses.
No, I mean it would not matter whether he got warning or not. The violation would be enough to not go through. So the only purpose of hatra'ah,
because then it wouldn't be a full. No,
it would be biblical. It's just that a biblical violation without warning isn't deserving of lashes. But that would be the only difference. Okay. All right. So now we'll continue. Finally, getting the video here starting. So continuing here on Zayin Amud Aleph, we pick up at the 2 dots. So we just mentioned that you need the 2, not just to prevent, to get out of a normal yichud situation, but also to serve as witnesses and to be able, the Talmidei Chachamim, to serve as warning, again, asserting based in sort of supervision over the whole process and presence in the whole process. Take a look also, Tosos, interesting Tosos I wanted to mention. Tosos says, Tosos says, okay, so when you send somebody to an Ir Miklat who killed by accident, he's accompanied with two Talmidei Chachamim, lest the Goel Hadam attacks this guy Baderech. Now, notice of this really interesting comparison, because the first day we were learning Sotah, I pointed out that you have these two cases in the Torah where start as vigilante justice, or taking the law into your own hands type of a thing, and Chazal and the Torah work to bring it under some form of control. So the biggest example of the cases of the Torah doing it is about the Goel Hadam with the accidental murder, right? And the Torah actually does, what the Torah does to that is what Chazal are doing to the Sotah, right? It says, V'shalchu ziknei ro v'lachu oso misham, that they send him to the Ir Miklat, they retrieve him from the Ir Miklat, Aramdo Lisneam, what is it, Lisnei ha, what? Lisnei Haida Limishpat. No, this is not going to be vigilante justice. The Beis Din is going to take control. They're going to control the whole proceedings and so on, right? So Sotah, I think some of you mentioned, maybe there was the first step in that in the Torah, that it took it out of honor killings and made it about a procedure in the Beis HaMikdash. And then Chazal take it to the next step to make it about din. But notice you have a similar parallel, that by the Arei Miklat, you make sure that the person is accompanied with Shnei Talmidei Chachamim, right? So again, the Beis Din's presence throughout the whole process by the Arei Miklat, and their presence throughout the whole process here by Sotah. And Tosus just points out there, the Gemara says, why two Talmidei Chachamim? The Gemara, my love, the Asru Be'edi Kato Bar Katalahu, the two Talmidei Chachamim are necessary, so if the Goel Adam is about to kill this guy, they'll be able to kill the Goel Adam. Okay, again, to give Hatra'ah. So the Gemara says, Alma Gabi Hatra'ah B'inan Talmidei Chachamim. So Tosus says, well, based on the way the Gemara explains both of those cases being about Hatra'ah, you need Talmidei Chachamim. Now, I don't know, we've never heard before you dafka need Talmidei Chachamim. It might say that Talmidei Chachamim ensure that they know what to do, but it doesn't mean that a Hatra'ah by a non-Talmid Chacham wouldn't count. But what I really wanted to show you was how stark the parallel here is between these two cases about the Beis Din ensuring that it's about a Beis Din type of a procedure. Yes?
There are also two cases that parallel in terms of the situations of great passion.
Right. That's a very good point. And that element of passion and us sort of calming everything down, and right, exactly, right. So all these things are there, right? Taking it away from sort of the passionate individual vigilante, making it judicial, calming everybody down, making a presence, and as we said before, taking it out of being like based in asserting that even a mikdash type of a ritual, ultimately it's about, Chazal and the Talmidei Chacham and Beit Din are the ones that ultimately are central to it. And, the Beis HaMikdash is under their authority, which also we've seen, like as I mentioned, by the Shnei Talmidei Chachamim, by the by Avodas Yom Kippurim. It's so funny there, like the whole thing is a Beis HaMikdash ritual. It's all about the centrality of the Beis HaMikdash, and the way the Gemara describes, the mission describes, right, the Avodas Yom Kippurim is based and is overseeing the whole process. All right.
This is the point I think is really powerful. According to the framework you're laying out, this whole thing is Chazal's attempt to impose a rational control over sort of crimes of passion, revenge and revenge and jealousy. Yeah,
I think it's a great point. Okay, so now the message is like this. So if you don't the husband is believed, which means that you don't need the two Talmidei Chachamim. We trust that he will not have sex with her. Okay, but that again is not just will trust not have sex. It changes the dynamics a lot. It means that what's the experience when they're leaving their town and going to Yerushalayim? Is the experience Beis Din is now bringing this woman to judgment, or is the experience the husband, the jealous husband, is now bringing his wife, right? So I think it makes a huge difference whether you have the presence of the two Talmidei Chachamim there. So let's see what Rabbi Yehuda says. Tani, we turn to Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Bala Neman Mikal V'Chomer. We can trust the husband not to have sex with her from a Kal V'Chomer. What's a Kal V'Chomer? Umanida she b'kareit Bala Neman Aleha. A nida, which the punishment is kareit, very weighty transgression. We trust the husband and wife to sleep together in the same room and not to have sex. So Sotah she belav, a Sotah, which is a simple negative prohibition of husband and wife having sex when she's in this suspected state. So, which we'll learn it out later where that's from. Lokol shkei, how much more so can we trust him to be not to transgress? Rabbanan, the rabbis would say, he anotenes, no, that argument that you said is exactly the argument why we don't trust him. Nida de kares chamirale umehemin. Nida's very weighty. It's kares. He'll be careful about that. We can trust him. Sotah, the law of Sotah, which is a simple negative prohibition, lo chamirale. It's not so weighty. V'lo mehemin. We won't trust him to keep to it. Rabbi Yehuda, so now the question is like this. Rabbi Yehuda mikav chomer ma'asila. Does Rabbi Yehuda want to back his argument from a kav chomer? Rabbi Yehuda mikrai ma'asila. He learns it from a pasuk. Titan, we turn the brisa. The man shall bring the wife. And again, notice, right? This is how is the process conceived? Is it the man bringing the wife or based in bringing her? So biblically, the man brings the wife. But the sages said, no, we have to have these sages in order lest he have sex. That's position number one, right? Which sounds like our Mishnah, but again, it also shows the contrast of how this becomes a different process than the one in the Torah. Rabbi Yossi says, so what we had in the Breita was Rabbi Yehuda's Kal V'chomer, in this Breita is Rabbi Yossi's Kal V'chomer. Okay, no, the Kal V'chomer. If you can be trusted by Nida, how much more so we can be trusted about Sotah? Amulo, they said back to now it's Rabbi Yossi. Lo, no. By Nida, he can be trusted because after she goes to the mikvah, she'll be permissible to him again. It's it's a regular type of a cycle there. But Tomer b'Sotah she'ein laheta, by the Sotah, if it turns out that she's guilty, there's no she'll never be permitted. So maybe he figures it's his last chance. Okay, so number one, that even besides the fact that they said before that because it's not as weighty, he'll be more ready to transgress, but because also it's maybe more permanent, he'll be more ready to transgress. The Omer, and in addition, there's another thing going on here. Mayim genuvinim taku, stolen waters is sweet. Now Tosfos says, why did you need this second one? So Tosfos says because maybe you'll say, look, he's had sex with her before. How could you say it's such a sense of urgency? No, now that she's forbidden, maybe that even makes it a little bit, more attractive, more of a seduction. So, of a temptation, I should say. So, tempted. So anyway, so that's how they pushed back and said why it is important. So now we have Rabbi Yossi arguing the Kal V'chomer, and let's see what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda in the first Breita was the Kal V'chomer. Let's see what he says here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mina Torah Yishmei V'yasishol HaKohen. No, from the Torah the man does it. Shenemar Ve'vias Ishto. So, and now he says, no, look, it's enough for the man to bring it. End of story. It's in the Torah. So what about the Kal V'chomer? In the first Breita he had a Kal V'chomer. Here he just quotes the pasuk. So the Gemara says, Meikara Amarlahu Kal V'chomer Bereisha. Now first he argued the Kal V'chomer like Rabbi Yossi did, and then they pushed back and they said it wasn't a good Kal V'chomer. So then he said, fine, forget the Kal V'chomer, but let's just go back to the psukim. It's the man. It's not the Beis Din. End of story. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Hainu Tanakama. 1 minute, the Tanakama also conceded that from the Torah's perspective, it's the man. So how are they different? They're all admitting that from the Torah's perspective, it's the man. So the Gemara says the obvious difference, or the little difference, which is a big difference, Ika Benayu Aval Amru. No, the difference is whether Chazal did something to change it. Okay, everybody concedes from the Torah's perspective, it's the man bringing his wife. The question is, did the rabbis say, yes, that's from the Torah, but we're going to now go ahead and do something to change it? And Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't want you to change the procedure. Okay, now what's very interesting is, the way the Gemara frames it is that Rabbi Yehuda concedes that maybe there is some basis to be afraid they'll have sex. But nevertheless, let's not mess with it the way the Torah has described it, which might push that, Rabbi Yehuda is trying to say, I don't want to change the nature of the whole process to the degree that you're changing it. I want to keep it a little closer to its biblical origins, with the husband sort of, being the one to be the sort of initiator or the one who's really the driver of the whole thing. Right? Now it's interesting to ask, let me just check quickly here. No, okay, fine. So anyway, let's see now the next Mishnah. But that becomes, again, I think that really does change the nature of how the process is the whole dynamic of the process.
It's interesting that no one said we should leave these two people alone for that long length of time.
Well, Rabbi Yehuda says we can leave them alone.
No, not in the sense of not in the sense of them deciding to have sex, but hurting each other, or
I see,
or running away because they really don't want to go do.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Maybe
reasons that you
Oh, that's an interesting question. Like, why aren't we afraid? That's a really good point, because if the woman is sort of in a position of a suspect, right? So why are we not afraid that she'll try to escape? Right. Right.
How about the possibility they may want to make up? Like,
but that's okay. No, that's okay. No, it's not okay. Once she's a Sotah, making up won't work because they can't have sex, because they still can't have sex.
Before he declares her a Sotah. Like, someone should have educated him to the ramifications of the whole process.
Right. Calm down now. Now he's over the passion.
Right, they're going together.
Look what he got.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of
this thing. They're saying, what did we do?
Exactly.
Right, well, that's in a way, if you remember going back to the first daf of the Gemara, the question was like, Asur Lakanos, the opinion of Asur Lakanos, one of the reasons, or certainly Bisman Hazeh, was you'll get yourself stuck and then you can't, retract. I have to tell you, by the way, not exactly this, but very similarly, these types of things happen today. I mean, I know of a case, a man suspected his wife of committing adultery, so what did he do? He went ahead and he hired a private eye, and he got all of this evidence, photographs and the whole thing, and then they wanted to make up. But then there's a big problem according to halacha, because if you've got that amount of evidence, right, then forget suspected adultery, like that was known adultery, right? How do you get, if it's just a woman who's admitting to her husband, there's tricks you can talk about. You technically have to believe her. But, sometimes you get yourself into a real bind. So it's absolutely correct. Now, by saying that he had to have witnesses at the stage of the warning, right, so hopefully that formalizes the process of warning, which means that he'll take a moment to pause before it. And remember, in the Mishnah, while the Gemara quoted a breita of an opinion that you didn't need witnesses for the warning, in the Mishnah, both opinions required witnesses for the warning. So hopefully at that stage, by formalizing that process, it'll be a moment to pause. But you're right, he can get himself totally stuck. But your point is also a really good one, right? Because at some degree, she's not yet a fully suspected person. I guess it's a good question in general, right? What happens, with somebody who's suspected of, in the middle of a court proceeding, of like, do we have a discussion of somebody essentially like being in jail? Let's, a simple case, right? Witnesses come and say, Reuven killed Shimon, and, you're going through the whole court case. Is there an assumption, like, what do you do with him during the process of the court? Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, so let's take a look at the next Mishnah. They would bring her to so go from one Beis Din to the next Beis Din, right? Not straight to the Beis HaMikdash. Now, it is true that the Beis HaMikdash of Yerushalayim was in the Beis HaMikdash, but that's not the focus. Okay? And they scare her, like they would scare people that come to testify about, about capital crimes. So what they do, somebody's come to testify capital crimes, they really want to make sure that they're not lying. So first they scare the wits out of them, if you're not totally certain what you say, maybe you're filling in some gaps, you're a little bit estimating or whatever, you should know, that if this person dies on account of your testimony, which isn't totally true, basically you'll be, you'll have spilled his blood, you'll be responsible for future generations, like they scare the wits out of them. And then what they do, though, is they say, on the other hand, if you really do know what you're doing and you don't testify, it'll also be a terrible thing. So basically, trying to make sure that if they are going to be, good witnesses, they will testify, but if there's a little bit of a question, that they won't testify. So they sort of scare them both ways. So here, they're going to scare her. So again, notice the emphasis of how much we're making it like din, right? Like we scare there, we scare here, It's a different type of a purpose of the scaring, but again, all of these parallels are explicitly being drawn. So let's take a look. Okay, you scare her. You say to her, or v'omimla, Piti, my daughter, harbe yayinosa. Wine often has a big effect, meaning basically they're trying to get her to admit, but we know it's hard to admit that you willingly did such a, terrible sin or betrayal of your spouse or whatever, so we're giving her extenuating circumstances. They're saying, look, sometimes people sin, they drink too much, they do things that they regret in the morning or whatever, so making it possible for her to say, yes, she did it, but not feel the full weight of the responsibility in coming across with the admission. Sometimes wine causes a lot of people to act in ways they wouldn't have acted. Harbe schok osa, or being too frivolous. Harbe yaldus osa, if you're young and maybe your passions get in control of you, or you're not. Harbe shchenim araimos, and sometimes we're egged on by our by our bad company and our neighbors, and they incite us to do things. So asi lishmo hagadol now basically do the right thing, do for the name of God's great name, shenichtav pikdusha, that would be written in holiness, shelo yimachel hamayim, it should not be scraped into the water. So it's interesting that the focus here is, why do we want to get her to admit, right? Why you want to get a normal person you suspect of committing a crime to admit is it saves you the cost of the trial, and it saves you the possibility that you're going to lose, right? I mean, that's why the prosecution tries to get somebody to plead guilty, and they'll make a plea bargain or whatever. Although it's terrible. I'm not going to go into it. There's been a lot written about how they get so many innocent people to plead guilty because of the whole way the system is is biased against you once you're caught up in that system. But anyway, but here, what's the benefit if we trust that the ritual, the water is going to work? Why are we trying to get her to admit? Now you could talk about, it's better at least for somebody's own sense that they own up on themselves rather than they're found guilty, just from a human perspective, rather than, or you could say, I don't know, maybe the other things we said, the water doesn't always work. Maybe we don't want her to die, But it's interesting here that the focus is totally on, we don't want to have to erase God's name without a purpose. So if there's a way to prevent her from admitting before the name is erased, that's what we're going to try to do. That it should not be dissolved in the water. And they say to her things that are not fit to being heard. That she is not fit for hearing. Okay, either the words or she is not fit for hearing these words. He and her entire family. So what are those things that are not fit for being heard? We'll see in the Gemara. But they scare the wits out of her. If she says I'm tme'ah, she writes a receipt for her ksuva. Not that she got the payment, she loses her ksuva. Okay, and she gets divorced. She admitted she's divorced, doesn't get her ksuva. End of story. If she says she's tahor, no, I'm innocent. You bring her to the eastern gate of the Mikdash, which is opposite Sha'ar Niknor, right? Basically, the way the Mikdash is, if you think about it, right? If this is like the whole thing, if this is the east, right? So you walk in, and this is the Ezrat Nashim. So this is like the eastern gate when you get into, the Beit HaMikdash. And then like midway here, at the end of the Ezrat Nashim, you have some steps up, and you have like the Azara, where they're actually, the altar is or whatever, and the Ezrat Yisrael, and at the top of those steps, you have the Shar Niknor, the Nikanor gate, which is leading from the Ezrat Nashim, the top of the steps, into the actual Azara. Okay? So it says by the Sotah, it says that she is presented Lifnei Hashem, before God, which ultimately is going to mean standing in the Nikanor gate, which is opposite, in the time of in the Torah would have been the Olam Moed, now it would be in the Heichal. Okay? And the Mizbeach. Okay, so you bring her to the eastern gate, which is opposite the Shar Niknor. Now in the Shar Niknor, there you cause the sotot to drink, and you purify the women who have given birth, and you purify those that are the lepers. What does that mean? The gate of Niknor is the width of the gate. I don't know, has anybody ever been through sometimes these city gates, these ancient city gates? It's like you could have like 3 feet of stone. I'm saying, like, it's really, really big. So Shar Niknor was like, it was a gate in a wall. So there was a thickness. So that area, that thickness in that gate did not have Kedushat Azara. It had the Kedusha of Ezrat Nashim, which was not the Kedusha of the Azara. So therefore that allowed people that were not totally tahor to come and stand there while the procedure that would finish to purify them was done. So for example, a woman who had given birth, who needed a korban. Now, in theory, she could have sent somebody to bring it, but this allowed her to be there in that gate as her korban was being brought, right? Because she couldn't enter into the Azara itself, but she could be standing in that gate. It allowed a Mitzorah who was not able to yet go into the Azara, and here you needed him there because you needed to put the blood of the korban on his thumbs. Well, how could you do that if he couldn't stand in the Azara? So he stood in the thickness of that wall, of that gate, and he put his thumbs out, and and they put the blood on his thumbs while he was standing in the thickness of the wall. That's actually a whole halachic question, whether bia b'niksat shma bia, whether partial entry into the Beit HaMikdash when you're tamei is considered like an entry or not, because his thumbs went in. Anyway, so here also is where the Sotah would stand. Now what's quite fascinating, I should say, about this comparison is that...
his right toe.
I guess same way. Stuck out his foot. So, okay.
Just not both at the same time, that's all.
No, right.
So the interesting thing here about the comparison, we've been comparing this to a judicial case, but now it's being compared to a different case, to a Tum and Tahara case. And notice the phrase, Tmea ani, Tahora ani. Now that's echoing the Torah's language, right? V'ni Tme'a, v'hi lo ni Tme'a, but it's very different. This is not a purification process. This doesn't make her pure. I mean, it sort of proves she's innocent, which is like making her pure, but she halachically is allowed to enter into the Beis HaMikdash. She does not have a tum'ah, that means she can't enter into the Azara. She's not like a Yoledis and a Mitzorah. Tum'ah means defiled because of having committed adultery. So it becomes very interesting that we're also now trying to put it in a tum'ah category, right, and talk about the fact that seeing her situated where other Tme'im are situated. And again, maybe this is, and this gets to this question before, maybe this is to try to deal with this sort of magic of the Sotah water. So before it was said, maybe a way we deal with it is we emphasize the din and we background the whole focus on that process, which maybe will come at the end if we don't succeed in stopping it any time earlier. But what this also maybe does is it allows us to reframe it as a Tahara process. Tahara processes, we know they're weird Tahara processes. There's one where you send birds off and you dip them in blood, right? There's ones where you put the blood on the fingers. So here's the process. She brings a mincha and you write some words on a parchment and you have her drink it, right? If you think of it as a Tahara process, not as some trial by ordeal, it also situates it in a place which is more understandable and something more recognizable. So it's very interesting here that we are now making this explicit comparison to these other Tme'im. Okay.
It's a matter of general practice. Women not generally enter into the...
Yes, it is true that there's a question like whether, women are allowed in the Eretz Yisrael, whether they needed special reason to, or just as a general practice they weren't, or whatever. But again, that would not be because, maybe, but it doesn't sound, in general we don't have a problem. If a woman needs to be in the Azara, she would be in the Azara. So it does sound like the comparison is going further than that. It's not like, there was a problem, she's a woman, we didn't want her in. Yes.
Then is there a question about where he's standing? If a foot goes into the...
Yeah, it would be the same as the thumb, yeah. Okay. Okay, so Kohen ochiz b'v'kadeha. Now the Kohen grabs onto her garments. The nikru, the nifrimu. If they were rended, they were rended. If they were torn in half, like nifrim is like not just sort of torn a little bit, but like ripped, like totally like a very big severing into two pieces. Okay, he would tear her garments, and no matter how much they tore, or hold on to her garments, even if they tore. The Kohen okay. Until he basically would expose her heart, literally expose her chest. So we'll see about that in a minute. So it's interesting because here it sounds like if by accident it tore, but now it sounds like explicitly he's tearing her garments. Why else is he holding it if not to tear it? The Sotah et se'ara, and he would undo her hair. He would expose her hair, which is right in the Torah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im haya liba na'eh, if her heart, but admittedly like her bosom was attractive, lo haya megalehu, he would not expose it. Okay, because this is an interesting question, right? This is all done to degrade her, but in the process you're uncovering things that are normally covered. And how much is this also becoming an erotic experience for the people that are around, right? So that becomes a whole tension going on here. And if her hair was beautiful, lo haya soter, he would not undo it. If she had been wearing white garments, you dress her in black garments. I don't know where they would do this change of clothes, before they got to the Beis HaMikdash, presumably not after he ripped her garments, presumably before he did the ripping, she was wearing these more unpleasant clothes. It's not exactly clear at what stage here they're doing this. Hayalel klei zahav, if she was wearing nice, golden jewelry, the katliot and various types, nizamim v'tabaot, various rings and chokers and whatever, earrings, ma'avir mimena, you remove them from her. Today linavla, in order to dishevel her, in order to make her look, what's a good word for nivul? Repulsive. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is here it seems like it wasn't just that she comes in without this, that there's actually a process of degrading her by stripping her of these things, right? That sort of seems to be very much the process. And then afterwards, you would take this type of Egyptian rope, a certain type of a rope, and you would bind it above her breast to hold up the garment so it would not continue to fall down, which is funny, like that probably was after they got ripped, so probably this whole thing about wearing the black clothes and taking off the jewelry was probably before, right? Or else, there's a little bit of a gap of time there. So probably first you would do the black clothes and take off the jewelry, then he'd rip the garments, and then afterwards tie them up again so they wouldn't fall down. And now it's making a public spectacle of it, which is not in the Torah. The Torah does not have it as a public spectacle. This makes a public spectacle of it. And that's also interesting to think about, because is this particularly doing something different, right? And this very much fits into issues we were discussing. It goes from a private enterprise between a husband and a jealous husband and his wife to a type of a din. Well, din is something in which is done in front of the public. And we actually know, what do we know about din? We know that there's some cases the Torah explicitly says, what does the Torah say? It says, V'chol ha'am yishme'u v'yiro. Sometimes some of the purpose of punishment is to serve as a public warning. So partly this shift that might have a lot to do with the shift again from this private thing between husband and wife to din, we are now turning it into a public spectacle. It is, though, interesting to think about two other points about this, making it a public spectacle. One is, what's his name? Somebody, I can't remember, some biblical scholar recently, not so recent, anyway, writes a lot about how Chazal turn a lot of things that go on in the Mikdash, they make them more public. Specifically, for example, if you think, we mentioned Yom Kippur before, but he talks about the other Chagim as well, which are things which is like, V'chol Adam lo yeh ba'ol mawei b'va'o b'chaper b'kodesh, like just totally him and God going in and so on. And we have, like, everybody is gathered there to hear the reading of the Torah, to see the red string turn white, to see him select for the goats, right? We turn it into a public sort of ritual. So on the one hand, this also fits that pattern. It's in the Beis HaMikdash, but we're bringing the public into it and making it a public ritual. The other thing that's interesting and that I forgot to mention before is a very important insight by Yishai Rosentzvi, who wrote a book on Masechet Sotah called HaTekes Shelo Haya, the ritual that never happened. And he says that if you look at the Mishnah, and we will see more of this in the Gemara, the Mishnah assumes from the very beginning that she's guilty. And the whole purpose from the Mishnah for this ritual is basically not to clarify if she's innocent or guilty, but to punish her. The purpose of the Sotah water is that she gets her due punishment. Okay, so he says the Mishnah never suggests what happens if she's innocent. What happens if it works out that she did not commit it? So, and he says, think about the way we scared her beforehand. What did we say when we scared her? We said, please, we understand why you might have sinned, just admit it, don't make us have to erase the name. We never say, but if you actually are innocent, then you should go through with it so you can be back with your husband, right? When we scare the witnesses, we scare them in both directions. Here we only scare her in one direction. We're assuming that she's guilty. So if you assume that she's guilty, you understand why you want to make this a public ritual, right? Why you want to make this a public spectacle. Because if it's just a court case to clarify, everybody else doesn't have to be around. But if we know what's going to happen, right? Think about when they had the public hangings, right? That would be like the entertainment of the month, right? We know what's going to happen. So, for a punishment for her, everybody should be gathered, and for the lesson for the Am. So again, if the presumption of her guilt also is what makes this a public spectacle. What? Oh, okay. Oh, right. Or you could say maybe it's all of this is just all of this is that you wanted to admit. That's true too.
That just diminishes your overarching point, right?
How does it do? How?
Because it mitigates the integrity of the judicial process by assuming
that she's guilty. Yeah.
Why are we doing this?
Makes it more terrible.
Well, because of the kinui and the stira. But I know, but so what, right? Look, we'll quote, the Gemara is going to quote the Tosefta and there are other Tanaitic opinions that are constantly saying, wait, he might be innocent. Why are we all making, why were you taking this? But yes, that's a good point. I mean, you're right, it does sort of make it less about din and more directly just about judgment, about punishment, rather than about adjudication. Right, that's true. Okay, so that was his insight, Yishai Rosenzweig. But again, what is worth noting is we took something that is a private thing between husband and wife in the Beit HaMikdash, and we've turned this into this public spectacle, okay, which very much does fit the idea, Kol Am Yishmu V'Yiro, and the din idea and so on, and the punishment idea. Anybody who wants to see, come and see. We don't allow her servants to be there, because that sort of bolsters her sense of confidence. Her servants are there. A, she maybe doesn't want to admit because her servants are there. B, it makes her feel, I'm still an important person. I've got my servants, so it will make her not want to, be cowed by the proceedings. And all the women can come and see her. So the Gemara says, we just said everybody could come and see her. But okay, we'll talk about that. All the women should come and see her. And all the women will take musar, will take heed, and will not do like her fornication. Okay, so this is a pasuk in Yechezkel, not exactly about this, but whatever. So again, that it's almost saying Kol Ha'am Yishmu V'Yiro, right? It turns it into that din of Kol Ha'am Yishmu V'Yiro. Let's take a look at the Gemara. Try to get a little bit further. Minani Mili, where do you know this from? So Amar Rabbi Chia Bar Gamda, Amar Rabbi Yosef Bar B'chanina. How do you know that you bring her to the Beis Din Agadol, which is again asserting Beis Din's oversight and really sort of running the whole show? Ask your Torah. Ksiv Hacha V'Atzalach Oenis Kol HaTorah Hazos. The Kohen shall do all of this teaching, all of this ritual. It says by the Zakin Mamre, by the Torah that he teaches, that they teach you should do. The same way the Zakin Mamre is only if he rebels against the Sanhedrin Hagadol. Here too, Al Torah Hazot means that it's ultimately overseen by the Beit Din Hagadol. Now, here's an interesting question about how central their role is, because if you think about it, what did they do? All they did was they warned her. Right? That's their whole role, to warn her. Big deal. Right? So far, Beis Din, it's been from one Beis Din to the next Beis Din, they're asserting their presence, but how much are they really doing? Right? They're protecting them from having sex along the way. They're warning her. Okay? So Tosfos has another question. Tosfos is bothered because he says the chronology doesn't work, because he says the halacha of Zakin Mamre is only when the Sanhedrin is situated in the Beit HaMikdash. We actually know that the Sanhedrin left the Beit HaMikdash before the Chorban Abayis, because they didn't want to have to deal with the responsibility of dealing with Dinei Nefashot. But the evidence points to the fact that they could still be doing Sotah rituals at that later time. So how could that be? It's not fitting this pattern of the Zakin Mamre of the Sanhedrin in the Beit HaMikdash. So if you take a look at Tosfos, let's see what he says. He says, Ma'al Beit Din Hagadol, Tosfos says, Kasha. Even the opinion of Zakin Mamre, that they have to be in Yerushalayim. Kimo Gabi Zakin Mamre. So, in case that would be true, the water should have stopped being effective when the Sanhedrin left the Beis HaMikdash. And then he proves that doesn't seem to work out. So just skip to the bottom, and he says like this: Veneer S, 3 lines from the bottom of the Tosfos. The iyum lo hayim ma'akev. You know what? The role of the Sanhedrin, the warning, would not be ma'akev, would not prevent you from going forward. If they didn't do this whole warning, if the Beis Din Hagadol wasn't involved in the process, she could still go through with it. So the whole thing, it's almost like exactly paralleling, Mina Torah ish maybe ishto. At one level we concede you could do without the whole Beis Din. Just go straight to the Beis HaMikdash. You don't need a Beis Din in your ear, you don't need the Beis Din to accompany, you don't need a Beis Din Hagadol to warn. It really is just in the Beis HaMikdash, right? He's conceding that this iyum, the role of the Beis Din Hagadol, really was not, if you didn't do it, it would still work. It was really not a necessary function. So at the same time, we are making it about Beis Din and putting them front and center in the entire process, right? There's a recognition that technically, actually, it could all go through without the Beis Din. Which, by the way, answers, and with this point we'll end, the previous Tosfos, I think, Again, also gets to a question you were sort of implicitly raising. Ma'al and b'shivim ve'echad, Tosfos says, Tema. Amaylo tani l'sotah v'zakin mamrei, l'sotah v'zakin mamrei, come to Sanhedrin, b'hadi hanu davi b'besin shel shivim ve'echad. Why don't we list Sotah and zakin mamrei in the cases of something that needs a basin of 71? Okay? We wouldn't do the end of the judgment. The end of the Sotah would be in the Beis HaMikdash. Zakin Mamre would be in a different location. But I think it's a question about, like the Sanhedrin lists the type of things that require a basin of 71, right? Certain types of, certain capital crimes and so on need a basin of 71. Why doesn't it say Sotah needs a basin of 71? So the real answer is what this second Tosfos just told us. Because at the end of the day, she's not being adjudicated in the basin, and the basin is not really necessary at the end of the day. At the end of the day, it really is a temple ritual. So it's quite fascinating. You're sort of seeing it at the same time. The whole thing is being presented as a din ritual, and an acknowledgement that really at the end of the day you could do away with that entire layer, and it could exist as a pure type of a Beis HaMikdash ritual. Okay, we will end with that today.
Maybe the role of the basin is to make it more public, more as a warning to the rest of the population.
Well, that's what I was saying, that it becomes like a public ritual, like Kol Am Yishmu V'Yiro.
The purpose is to warn the rest of the population.
Yeah, that's